Okay, it's nearly 4:05, so we're going to start. Thank you all for coming to this seminar that is organized by the Energy Studies program. I am Malik Tabal, a member of the Energy Study Committee. Today we're very happy to welcome Dr. Ali Ahmad, who is a research fellow in nuclear energy policy at Princeton University, Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. Dr. Ahmad is initially a physicist. Your background, your BS is in physics.
Correct.
And his PhD is from nuclear engineering from Cambridge University. But since he joined Princeton, now you're looking more at the policy aspect of energy as a whole,
yes,
and nuclear power more specifically.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to keep you waiting for so long. Dr. Ali Ahmad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Tabal. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and also great to see some old friends from Cambridge. It's really amazing. I think today is a wonderful opportunity to have this discussion, given the mini fever or mini epidemic of nuclear power that is spreading across the Middle East. Today, we have several countries in the Middle East that have long-held ambitions or plans to have nuclear powers. In recent years, these ambitions gained more momentum, perhaps after it was clear that Iran is not going to shut down its nuclear program, and the UAE started constructing its first nuclear reactor. Just in the past few months, we have seen several intergovernmental agreements being signed. For example, Algeria just signed an agreement with Russia to cooperate on peaceful use of nuclear energy. Jordan has signed similar agreement with the Russians, but perhaps in a much more advanced stage regarding their nuclear program. Saudi Arabia, for example, they have been talking to everyone about their nuclear program, and in the past 2 weeks, they have signed an agreement with the Chinese. So you have a nuclear activity all over the region. Of course, there are different levels of commitments between these countries, but I think it's a great opportunity to be here today to discuss the prospects or the challenges of nuclear power in the Middle East. Before I start specifically talking about countries in the region, perhaps I should give a global overview of nuclear power. So currently there are 388 nuclear reactors operating across the world. This number actually is down by 40 compared to last year due to the situation in Japan. Japan, after the accident of Fukushima, decided to stop their nuclear program, and they shut down all of their reactors. These reactors are in 31 countries, and you can see that the use of nuclear energy is limited to a small number of countries, given that we have 198 or 193 members of the United Nations. The generation capacity of all these reactors is about 330 gigawatt, which is approximately 10% of the global electricity demand or needs. Half of these countries that have a nuclear power are based in, they are in the European Union, mainly in France. For example, France produces 75% of its electricity by nuclear power. In the Middle East, as you can see on this map, we have only one reactor currently operating. This is the Bushehr reactor in Iran. I will talk about it in more details later. So, in terms of trends, this year we have 67 reactors currently listed as under construction, and this number is the highest since 1987. If you look at this graph, you might have the impression that there is a renaissance happening with regards to nuclear power. However, this graph is slightly misleading for two reasons. The first one, half of these reactors that are currently under construction are actually under construction in one country, in China. And the second reason, a lot of these reactors, they have been listed as under construction for so many years. For example, the the Beirut reactor in Tennessee in the US has been under construction since 1972 and still listed as under construction. Indeed, the 21 reactors in China out of their 30 reactors currently under construction are experiencing severe delays, which range from few months to few years. The question I would like to start with is why countries consider nuclear power, or what are the key motivations for countries, including the countries in the Middle East, to have a nuclear power. If you want to answer this question, you will find that there are different factors or different reasons, and these reasons, they change over time. For example, the Russian, the American, or the UK nuclear programs, they were established post-weaponization when these countries wanted to establish their peaceful nuclear program to maintain having the capacity or the capability to have access to sensitive nuclear materials and to create jobs for their nuclear engineers that they took part in their nuclear programs. More recently, these motivations, or the motivation to have nuclear power, shifted more towards more economic reasons. So now, for example, you have people advocating nuclear power as a response to meet the increasing energy demands. You have also, I mean, if you come to the Middle East, you hear a lot about energy security. Energy security is a term that is often mentioned in the discussion when nuclear power is mentioned. Mainly, many countries, they have reserves of oil and gas, and sorry, many countries don't have reserves of oil and gas, and they see nuclear power as a base load option that could provide energy for their demand. I mean, even countries who do have that do have oil and gas reserves, they are realizing that their reserves are being depleted, and they want to find an alternative soon. You have also issues such as energy diversity. Countries now also advocating diversified energy portfolio simply to reduce reliance on one form of energy and reduce reliance on some influences of certain markets as well. And if you go outside the Middle East or outside the developing countries, and for example, in the US or in the UK, the main rationale to have a nuclear power is climate change. I personally don't think that without climate change, I think that without climate change, no one will be talking about nuclear power in the US or in the UK. Nuclear energy in those countries is seen as a carbon-free energy option, which is, I think, is inaccurate. Yes, nuclear power produce much less carbon dioxide, but it does produce significant amount of carbon dioxide, perhaps not in the reactor, but throughout the whole fuel cycle. For example, if you want to do uranium mining, you produce a lot of carbon dioxide. So nuclear power is not carbon-free. It does produce, however, much less carbon dioxide than other energy sources such as oil or natural gas. Another option or another reason why Middle Eastern countries are thinking of nuclear power is energy substitution. This is economically related to the opportunity cost. So for example, oil-rich countries such as Saudi Arabia, they look at nuclear power as an alternative to use their oil domestically. They realize that by consuming their oil domestically, they are missing out on a big opportunity cost, that they can sell this oil on the international market and they can achieve higher profits. So you have nuclear energy that can overtake this option, and they can free up their oil reserves for export. And of course, you have often hidden or undeclared reasons why countries also want to have a nuclear power. These are also relevant to the Middle East, such as national prestige, and you have also countries that may want to have a nuclear power as a virtual deterrence or virtual hedging option, that they can use their nuclear program potentially to develop a nuclear weapon once needed. But of course, these reasons or these motivations are not declared. So as I mentioned, in the Middle East, we have several countries that are interested in having a nuclear power. These countries are at different level of commitments to their nuclear plans. We have Iran. I mean, I will be talking about Iran and the United Arab Emirates in more details later. But you have Iran currently operating the only nuclear reactor in the Middle East in Bushehr. This reactor was completed only last year by the Russians. The UAE currently constructing 2 out of 4 reactors they got from the South Koreans. You have Algeria. Algeria now thinks of, they have a research reactor, they have decent human resources, and they are thinking to have nuclear power as a serious policy option. Egypt has had long-standing interest in nuclear power since the days of Nasser. And, but the problem with Egypt that they have 3 main issues. They have geopolitical issues, they have economic issues, and more recently, they are having also problems with public acceptance. Recently, there were clashes between the Egyptian army and the citizens of Al-Dab'a, where the reactor is proposed to be built. And after these clashes, the Egyptian government decided to postpone the discussion over this particular site. Jordan has also committed plans to build the nuclear reactors. I personally have been working on Jordan over the past few months. I've been traveling a lot to Jordan because I'm also doing some advisory to the Jordanian parliament on their nuclear program. If you want my honest impression, it's a big mess. Maybe perhaps I can share with you more details about this during the discussion. Saudi Arabia also reiterates always their interest in having nuclear power. They actually have a very ambitious program. They want to build 16 reactors by 2032. I'm not sure if this is realistic, but at least that's what they want, that's what they say. However, from my personal contact with the Saudi policymakers, they are very opaque. They are very ambiguous on what technology they want to choose, or what exporting or what technology exporting country they want to collaborate with. As I mentioned, they are talking to everyone, but so far there is no strong signal that they have chosen one country over another. Sorry. Lastly, we have Turkey. Turkey also has had long-standing interest in nuclear power. Their interest started in the early 70s, and they have signed contracts with the Russians. They have reached the most advanced stages with the Russians regarding building their first reactor in Akkuyu on the Mediterranean coast. Also, they have problems with this, but I will come back to this later. And also, Turkey is planning to build another reactor in Sinop on the Black Sea.
Sorry,
yes.
How come Israel is not listed?
Well, Israel does not have civil nuclear program. They have weapon nuclear program, and the reason for that is political mainly. If Israel wants to have a civil nuclear program, they will have to be open to the IAEA, and this would affect their nuclear weapon program. Yeah. Right. So I would like to discuss the case of Iran and the UAE in more details, because these 2 countries are the most serious when it comes to nuclear power deployment. The Iranian nuclear program is the most well established in the region. Their nuclear program started in the 1950s, ironically by the US. It was under the help of, it's called the program, I think, Atoms for Peace program. It was a 50s program, so the US helped Iran at that time, but of course that was during the days of the Shah. And the Shah, as you can see here on the figure, this is an advertisement in one of, I think, New York's newspapers in the 70s, that the Shah is planning to build the Bushehr reactor. Of course, at that time, the US had no objection to Iran having a nuclear power, given that the 2 countries were politically very close. But after the construction of the Bushehr reactor started in the 1976, and the progress stopped soon after the Islamic Revolution, and then you had the Iraq-Iran war, and the program was abandoned for a long time until the early 90s, when Iran slightly recovered from the war, and then they went to the Russians and suggested that the Russians will take over and start helping them finishing the Bushehr reactor. What is interesting about Iran, this is perhaps interesting when you compare it to the UAE. Iran is interested not only in building nuclear reactors, Iran is interested in having a fully indigenous nuclear program. Iran wants to have full control over its nuclear program. They want to have control over fuel enrichment. They want control over every aspect of the nuclear fuel cycle. And this has created a lot of controversial issues, and that's a major issue now between Iran and the West. And I'm sure you are all aware of the current negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. And the large part of these negotiations is based on Iran's will or Iran's need to have this full control over its nuclear program. Because Iran's nuclear program is the most well-established, I think they have at least one generation of well-trained engineers and scientists, and thanks to those scientists, Iran managed to get things done very quickly. So in terms of human resources, they have an advantage that they have very great minds and well-trained engineers. If you look at the UAE case, for example, it's slightly different. The UAE surrendered its right to have a nuclear program, so the UAE does not have any control over the fuel cycle. They import the fuel from South Korea, and then when the fuel will be spent, they will send it back to South Korea. So essentially, the UAE did not establish a nuclear program. They just are buying nuclear electricity from a reactor on their soil. So the UAE started their interest in having a nuclear program. It started in 2006 when all the GCC states agreed together to have a joint nuclear program. But soon after this, all these countries, they went separate ways, and the UAE decided to go alone and pursue nuclear power as soon as possible. And this led them to sign an agreement or to choose KEPCO, the South Korean-led consortium, to build its first reactor or first 4 reactors in 2009. The first 2 units of these reactors are currently under construction in Al Baraka site in Abu Dhabi. And they are projected that they will be connected to the grid by 2016 and 2017, respectively. The value of the contract between the UAE and the South Koreans or the KEPCO is estimated about 20 billion. Now, this is really a good deal for the UAE. I think they managed to get a very good deal out of the South Korean. I think the deal was criticized even inside South Korea as commercially very weak. And the South Korean, some of the South Korean policymakers complained that future buyers might also ask or demand similar prices or similar treatment. However, my personal impression is that the South Koreans deliberately offered this very low price for the UAE because they wanted the UAE to be their first client in the region, because they were hoping that after the UAE, other countries will see them or will look at them as a credible nuclear vendor, and then they will come running to them asking for more reactors. But the reality that this did not happen, and so far the South Koreans have not managed to replicate their success with the UAE. They were hoping a lot on Saudi Arabia, but as I mentioned, Saudi Arabia has not given any indication that they prefer the South Korean technology. So, and recently the IAEA admitted that the cost of the project may well be higher than 20 billion. So it is very likely that the South Korean will be actually losing out of this project. So if you are a country in the Middle East and you want to buy or build a nuclear reactor, what are the available technologies? What can you buy on the market now? So there are 6 technologies. All of these technologies are called water reactor technologies. Some of them are called pressurized water reactor. And for example, the first 4 are pressurized water reactor, PWRs. You have here boiling water reactor developed by Japan and the US. And you have also a heavy water reactor technology that is developed by India and France. So all these reactors are currently available, and by available I mean they are either under construction or they have been constructed. Of course, there are many other designs that are not under construction, but these designs are not listed because they are not proven yet. And especially after Fukushima, from my discussions with people here in the Middle East, they strongly excluded any technology that has not been tested. So most likely, or perhaps definitely, that if a country in the Middle East wants to build a nuclear reactor, it should be one of these technologies. Now, the two highlighted in red are the currently deployed reactor. For example, the reactor at Bushehr in Iran is a VVER reactor, the Russian reactor. And it has a 1,000 megawatt capacity. The South Korean technology, the APR 1400, is about 1,400, well, this is in the name, 1,400 megawatt capacity. Now, the common factor, I mean, technologically, these reactors are very similar. So there are subtle differences in the design, but from the technology point of view, they have a lot of similarities. Another common factor is that these reactors have, as you can see, they have very high capacity. The highest is the EPR, the French one, has 1,600 megawatt. This is really huge capacity to be added. I think perhaps also I should mention additional thing on why the UAE decided to choose the South Korean technology. Of course, the price was amazing, but I think also that the South Korean were smart to offer the UAE support in like training programs and personal developments for the UAE people, and I think this factor perhaps shifted the interest of the UAE from other bidders to choose the South Koreans. So they have not offered only good price, but they have offered the whole package of training and personal development of Emirati scientists. Okay, so over the past year, as Professor Tabbal mentioned, since my shift from physics to policy, I've been looking at, I was personally interested in studying the economic competitiveness of nuclear power, particularly in the Middle East. And my colleague at Princeton, Ramana, and myself, we have done a long study to assess the economics of nuclear power in Saudi Arabia. And this study was published in Energy earlier this year. And pretty much in the next few slides, I'll be explaining our main findings. Of course, these findings can be generalized to other Middle Eastern countries or other regions. From economic point of view, nuclear power has three main disadvantages. The first one, it has very high capital costs. And what makes things worse is that these costs have also high uncertainties. So you already start with high capital cost, but over time, and this has been historically shown or proven that most of these nuclear reactor projects end up with a much higher cost than what was initially proposed. For example, even in developed countries like Finland, they are building now an EPR, French EPR reactor. The reactor is 8 years delayed, but this is not the problem, or this is of course main problem, but the economic burden of that was the reactor initial cost was 5 billion or 5.5 billion, and the current cost of the reactor is touching 9 billion. So they are 4 billion over budget. So these high uncertainties in the cost, really, it's a big problem when it comes to financing a nuclear reactors, because if you want to build a capital-intensive project, you want to attract investors. Investors don't want to have a 50% change over 2 years in the capital cost of the project. It will be a very high-risk project. Also, when you talk to proponents of nuclear power, they always bring this newcomer country. They mention that these high costs are mainly they mainly happen in countries that don't have a nuclear program, but this is actually not true. If you look at France, for example, France has a well-established nuclear program, and they have a reactor in Flamanville in the south of France, and Flamanville has been experiencing major delays and also a couple of $1 billion over budget. So not only countries that don't have nuclear power suffer from these time and cost overruns, but also countries that have well-established nuclear programs, such as France. Another main problem of nuclear power is long construction time. In our study, we estimated that the global average of building a nuclear reactor is 8 years. And this is an underestimation, because our estimation was based from the moment you pour the concrete until the final commissioning of the reactor. But of course, if you want to build a nuclear reactor, you have a lot of activities that comes before this, regulation, political activities, and this takes even longer. But of course, it's difficult to quantify that time, and you want it to be scientifically correct. So that's why we use this number of 8 years. But as you will see later, this number actually is very important when you want to compare a nuclear reactor to solar technologies or other types of energy resources. Another issue which is often overlooked, and I was personally interested in, is that people who work in the energy field, they treat oil and natural gas as energy sources that have opportunity cost, which means you are better selling your oil or natural gas on the international market than using domestically, because this way you can make more profit. I think nuclear power has also an opportunity cost, and this is very evident, for example, in the case of Jordan. So when I first met the Khalid Toukan, the president of the Jordan Atomic Energy Commission, he was convinced that Jordan is able to have the diversified energy portfolio. This means that they want to have nuclear power, they want to have solar power, and other resources, other renewable resources. Now, the discussion in Jordan now that they don't have money, not money to sponsor all these activities. They don't have even money to sponsor a single aspect of these activities. They don't have money to build a nuclear reactor. So essentially, if Jordan wants to build a nuclear reactor, it cannot diversify. So therefore, if Jordan decided to invest in nuclear power, they will be unable to sponsor solar technologies. And this has a significant opportunity cost. As we will see later, solar has a very promising prospect.
So what about investors? You don't encourage investors to come and invest in solar energy in Jordan or any nuclear energy? Even if they don't have money, they can still encourage investors to come in and take control over that and then reimburse it after time.
Well, this is potentially a model, but I mean, in terms of financing this project, you have two models. What you rightly said is one of the models, but Jordan has not very good credit rating, and I think it's very, very difficult, given that their financial situation, to be able to invest, to attract major investments. And therefore, that's why they haven't gone into that way, into the private way. What Jordan is doing now is it's called government-to-government model. They are trying to talk to the Russians and take loans from the Russians. So it's kind of a different model. But even in that regard, the Russians are not super excited about it. Perhaps I can tell more details later on this. So in that study on Saudi Arabia, we compared the nuclear power with solar technologies and nuclear power with solar gas. Let me start with nuclear power with solar gas, or the solar power. A conventional way to compare the cost of electricity from different energy resources is to do some calculations called levelized cost calculations. And this is like a mathematical formula, but it can be simply understood as the ratio of the cost of a project divided by the benefits, and the benefits in this case is the amount of electricity produced. So if you look at today's values, solar technology is more expensive than nuclear technologies, but I think this is the mistake. So people compare solar and nuclear based on today's values. But if you look back in the previous slides about the average time required to build a nuclear reactor, it's about 8 years. So it would make much more sense if you compare solar with nuclear, not when the construction starts, but when the reactor actually starts generating electricity or operating. So what you see here is the trends or variations or projections of cost over the next 6 years until 2020. The red band represents nuclear power, and you can see nuclear power is constant, the cost is constant. Actually, here we are being generous to nuclear power because recent studies showed that the cost of nuclear power is actually increasing. So in that regard, we are, we are giving nuclear power an advantage here. On the other hand, you see that the cost of solar technologies is declining. Now, a lot of independent analysts, government, the Energy Administration in the US, the International Energy Agency, McKinsey and Company, all these institutions, they have came up with projections to the cost decline of solar technologies. And their value was around 70%. So between 2010 and 2020, that the cost of solar technologies will be down by 70%. So in our study, we again decided to be more conservative and only consider decline between 20 and 40%. And you can see that by 2020, solar panel or solar technologies may well be cheaper than nuclear. And by 2025, if these trends continue in the same way, by 2025 or the end of 2020s, solar technologies will definitely be cheaper than nuclear technologies. So in the case, again, going back to Saudi Arabia, if Saudi Arabia wants to build a nuclear reactor today, this reactor will not generate electricity until after minimum 8 years. So it would make much more sense to compare the cost of solar and the nuclear, not now, but after 8 years. And based on that comparison, solar technologies will have a significant economic advantage. Sure.
More about these divergence. So what is this?
Yes, as I said, so the band is, you have two rates of decline. It's between 20 and 40%. So the lower band is 40% and the upper band is 20%. And anywhere in the middle is, again, this is a very conservative because what economists and energy analysts think is that the decline in cost will be even more aggressive than this. But I mean, this is, I should mention this, in our study, we deliberately or consciously decided to be in favor of nuclear power because we did not want to be accused that we are anti-nuclear. We are just showing, what the reality is without taking any kind of particular position. I mean, myself, I'm a nuclear engineer, so I have some emotional attachment. However, if you look at the bigger picture, perhaps this is kind of the main takeaway of this slide is that from economic point of view, nuclear power does not stand close to solar technologies.
And why did you keep the nuclear price at like about 8 cents kilowatt hour,
right? Right. I mean, this is again, the cost of nuclear very much depends on the country. It depends on geographic location. So you have a range of cost escalations. For example, if you build a nuclear reactor in a country where you have cheap labor, you might have cheaper overall costs. But as I said, if you look historically, the cost of nuclear power has actually increased, and this is what we call negative learning, while in solar technologies you have negative learning. If you look at the curve of solar technologies over the last decade, you have an exponential decline in their costs, while for nuclear it has actually increased. Yep.
Why has the cost of nuclear power increased?
Right. This is a very good question. It's related to having nuclear accidents. So after every nuclear accident, nuclear engineers or the nuclear industry recognizes that there is a problem. And because of this, they either increase the quality of the material, either increase the, for example, if you look at the current technologies of nuclear reactor, they have a lot of safety systems. And if you want to add more safety systems, this means you have to add more costs. So that's why new reactor technologies are safer, correct, but because they are safer, they are more expensive. Yeah.
Can you comment on new technologies in nuclear energy, like thorium-based? Has it been commercialized? Has it been scaled up to commercial levels? There are claims that this will really reduce the cost of...
Sure. I think the idea of thorium is very interesting. Personally, I think thorium has the potential to offer something different. However, two things should be considered. The first one is that the technology to use thorium is not well developed, and it will, you have a lot of safety issues, you have a lot of economic issues. As I said, countries now, they always, especially after Fukushima, they don't want to experiment. They want something that has already been proven. And this is perhaps unfair to thorium, but this is the reality of the thing. The second issue is time. If you want, I personally don't think that thorium will be ready for the next maybe 20, 30 years, and I think by that time you have already been solar will be, I think, the dominant force in the market, and there is no, from economics point of view or investment point of view, there's no incentive for investors to go back to nuclear.
And from a capacity standpoint, is solar enough to provide the capacity required or equivalent to a nuclear plant? Can you build a solar plant anywhere today or 5 years down the road that would provide you with as much?
The capacity is another interesting point. If you take individual plants, solar has lower capacity, but you can also, solar has more flexibility with siting. For example, to come up with a site for a nuclear reactor, it's a big dilemma. However, you are more flexible with solar. You can build as many as you want in whatever region you want. And actually, I mean, since we are talking about the Middle East, you have more incentive to build here because you have higher solar insolation. So on the capacity, yes, maybe you lose a little bit, but you can compensate for that by building multiple modules, and since you don't have any restrictions on the siting.
Isn't the cost of, basically isn't the marginal cost higher because of the weather and the fact that there's dust and maintenance and so on and so forth in solar that you don't have in nuclear? So on the longer term, it would make more sense to also think of conserving the region, except for the water.
I think, yes, I mean, technologically you may have issues with, especially solar panels. But when you're right if you're only discussing solar panels. Even though personally I think this is a solvable problem, and for me the solution is very easy. If you have a solar plant in an area where you have dust, or you can simply change the site in a more to a better humidity or a better dust, and fewer dust, and you solve the problem. However, when you talk about solar, you have also different kinds of technologies. You have thermal solar as well, which can be a thermal process. It's not like solar PV. And going back to the previous question about solar, also solar, the advantage of it can be deployed on two levels. It can be deployed commercially by a government building a big utility, but also it can be deployed by people. It can be deployed on rooftops, and this model is being implemented in Germany nowadays. And the German population is selling electricity back to the grid, and they're making some money out of it. So it's the bottom line here is that solar offers you better flexibility with regards to siting. And
about nuclear wastes.
Mm-hmm.
Does this increase the cost? Because the problem is difficult to solve.
Actually, yes.
Right?
Well, if you look at the cost estimation of nuclear power, including our study, no one mentions nuclear waste. And we don't mention nuclear waste because we know it's a dominant cost factor. If you take nuclear waste, the decommissioning of the reactor and treating the waste, of course, this would add the cost significantly. But the question is always, how much can the cost increase? And when you don't have a rigid number or a solid number to fall on, then you prefer not to include it, and you just mention it in the text and not include it in the number. However, you're absolutely right. If you take the decommissioning of the reactor and treatment of the waste, the cost of nuclear might shoot up even higher. Yeah.
But it can be sold. Now they are selling it for enrichment. The U.S. program now is taking back all the nuclear waste for enrichment, or the Japanese are taking it for isotopes.
Sure, I mean,
so it's a valuable item. It's not anymore a dump material.
Yes, you have two options with regard to nuclear waste. As you rightly pointed out, yes, indeed, you can recycle it, but I think recycling is a very expensive process. Reprocessing of nuclear waste is a very expensive process, and that's why the UK government decided to shut down their recycling power plant. In fact, the only country in the world that now is doing recycling is Japan. And now even Japan, they are considering shutting down their recycling plants. So yes, in principle, you can recycle and take this fuel back, but the economic cost of this is actually even more significant.
The Americans are taking it and like subcontracting all the nuclear waste for enrichment.
I think the Americans, I don't think they are.
For security.
Exactly. I think their rationale is not economic. Their rationale is security.
Right.
But again, it's not. I mean, the U.S. has given up on enrichment, and for example, now U.S. reactors, they get their fuel from Urenco. It's not enriched in the U.S. or in the U.S., but it's not U.S. technology. And at the same time, they have given up recycling. But if they acquire some waste back, it's as you mentioned, it's for security reasons. So moving to comparison between solar and nuclear and natural gas. The comparison here is more difficult, and the reason for that, unlike solar technologies, the price of electricity generated by natural gas depends on the price of natural gas. And the price of natural gas varies with time and varies spatially. It varies from one country to another. So you cannot really do a generic comparison cost comparison between gas and nuclear. So you have to have some geographic or country context. And for this table here, this is taken from a chapter I wrote for a book on energy policy in the GCC. So it's based on GCC parameters. What you see here is the crossover value between solar and between natural gas and nuclear. For example, if you are a natural gas importer, the crossover value is $9.5 per million BTU. What does this number mean? This number means that if you are a country and you can import natural gas for lower than $9.5 per million BTU, nuclear power is not economic compared to natural gas. Any values higher than this value, nuclear power would be more economic for you. But there are also some subtle differences in the modeling of these countries. For example, if you are a natural gas exporter or producer, but you don't have infrastructure, such as Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has a lot of natural gas, but they don't export it. They use it all domestically. And if Saudi Arabia wants to sell this natural gas on the international market, I mean, the only way for them is to sell it as LNG, liquefied natural gas. And for this, they have to build a lot of infrastructure and they spend more cost. And that's why their crossover point is higher. Their crossover point is $13.6 per million BTU. If you are a country like Qatar that has a lot of natural gas but also has infrastructure already been built, then the crossover is slightly lower. It's $11.4 per million BTU. As you can see, the main variable here is the price of gas. So the question is, what will be the price of gas for the next 2 decades? Of course, I'm not going to predict this, because if I can predict this, I can be a billionaire, perhaps, in the stock market. However, there are 2 indications that tell us why natural gas prices will decline significantly over the next decades. The first one, you have the shale gas revolution, and you have increased supply of natural gas across the globe. But I think more importantly, so far natural gas is oil indexed. This means that the price of natural gas is linked to the price of oil. And recently the price of gas was high because simply the price of oil was high. But now there is a movement, there is no economic modeling models that promote that the price of natural gas to be separated, to be independent from oil. And if you do that, then given the extra supply of natural gas, there is no incentive for the prices to go up for the next couple of decades. So if I am a Saudi policymaker thinking of these elements, I would think twice before building infrastructure to export natural gas. Actually, it would be better for Saudi Arabia to use their natural gas domestically than export it. Moving on from the economics, another main challenges of nuclear power is the spread of nuclear weapons, or the possibility. By the way, Professor Tabbal, how are we doing with time? Okay.
Can you mention a bit about the mess in the Jordanian power plant?
Sure. 10 minutes?
Before
including the Q&A, or?
We're having questions along the way.
Okay, sure. Right. Okay. I will, but perhaps may I just continue now and then come back to Jordan? So if a country like Iran, for example, wants to have a fully indigenous nuclear program, this country has to undertake activities related to the whole nuclear fuel cycle, related to uranium enrichment, processing, making the fuel, taking the fuel out, and then perhaps recycle it. In this fuel cycle, there are two stages, two very sensitive stages where a diversion of sensitive nuclear materials can happen. The first stage is after enrichment or during enrichment. A country, for example, instead of enriching uranium to levels to make a fuel for power reactors, they can enrich it higher to make nuclear weapons. And the second stage is, or the second stage where diversion can happen is after reprocessing. So instead of the plutonium recovered from the spent fuel, instead of putting it back in the fuel, you can put it aside and make a nuclear weapon out of it. So Mohammed al-Baradei, the former Director General of the IAEA, said that should a state with a fully developed fuel cycle capability decide for whatever reason to break out away from its non-proliferation commitments, most experts believe it could produce nuclear weapons within a matter of months. Let me tell you this. This is an understatement. If a country has a fully developed nuclear program with enrichment capacity, high enrichment capacity, or reprocessing plant, and by the way, having a reprocessing plant is very easy. The process is chemically very simple. It's a very simple chemistry. Making a nuclear weapon is a walk in the park. It doesn't take months, it might take weeks, if not days. So, but the question is, what are the numbers? How much uranium? If you want to build a uranium-based weapon, how much uranium do you want? If you want to build a plutonium weapon, how much plutonium do you want? And the IAEA recognizes these numbers as significant quantities. For uranium, you need only 25 kilograms, and for plutonium-based weapons, you only need 8 kilograms. And if a country has a well-established nuclear program with thousands of kilograms coming in and out, diverting these small amounts will not be even noticed. I will jump quickly to nuclear safety. Most, if not all, proponents of nuclear power claim that nuclear power is safe, and they often bring the calculations of low probability of accidents. You have one accident every 1 million years. Now we know that this is wrong. Over the past 50 years, we have, well, forget about the hundreds of accidents that happen every year. By the way, on a daily basis, there are accidents that happen, but simply you don't hear about these accidents because they are not large enough. They are not big enough, and there is no major release of radioactivity. Of course, there are some operational accidents. A pump stops here and there. A switch is flipped here and there. Of course, we don't hear about these accidents, but these accidents have the potential to become large. However, over the past 50 years, we had the 3 Mile Islands in 1979, we have Chernobyl in 1986, and more recently we had Fukushima. And the impact, what happened, the nuclear industry after each crisis, the first thing they do is either to deny or to downplay the impact of these accidents. And then once the impact is realistically assessed, they come back to you and said, we admit it was a big accident. However, we learned the problem, we learned the lesson, and this will never happen again. But it happens again. Here I have a picture of Fukushima. I recently met with Gregory Yasko, the former head of the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He was in control when Fukushima happened. And he honestly told me that for the first 5 days, the US scientists had no clue what was going on. And for me, this was astonishing because the Fukushima reactor is a US design. So you would expect US scientists to know the best about these reactors. But the fact that the US scientists did not have any clue what was going on is, I think, an indication is that sometimes people in the nuclear industry are overconfident or overestimating their capability to deal with the crises. Perhaps this is the last, yes, this is my last slide on safety. I can give you a lot of examples. I've done work on Jordan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, but I can give you a lot of examples where safety issues can be a problem. After Fukushima, a lot of countries, for example, all the GCC states apart from Saudi Arabia and Emirates decided to walk away from nuclear because of Fukushima. The countries that remain interested, they just focused on higher safety standards on the technology. But for me, this is the wrong emphasis. Yes, there's a problem with the technology, but there's equally a problem with the human factor. There's a problem with the safety culture in the region. Not only in the region, globally. If you go back to Fukushima, one of the reasons that Fukushima happened is that Japanese scientists, they were very respectful of their managers. The Japanese scientists, they predicted that this would happen if you have a big tsunami or big earthquake, but they were afraid of voicing their opinions because they were very respectful of their managers. And let's be honest, we have such a culture here in the Middle East. So the first example I would like to give you is in Jordan. So for example, in Jordan, they first started doing a site assessment. They chose 6 sites. So they formed a national committee, and this committee chose a site in Al-Aqaba and ruled out the other sites. And then they brought an international consulting company, and this consulting company reached a similar conclusion that the Al-Aqaba site is the most suitable, if not the only suitable site. What happened is that over one night, no one knows what was the reason. There was no justification. It was a completely political decision. The site was shifted from Aqaba to Al-Samra, which is a site inside Jordan and has no water. So can you imagine a nuclear reactor in a site that has no water? Okay, I spoke to the Jordanians, and their plan is to pump water from 60 kilometers away from a water treatment facility. My first question to them was, how can you secure a 60-kilometer pipe, given what we are witnessing in the Middle East? The second important question is the whole lack of technical justification of such a step. How can you change your site over one night? And one of the impact of this, that the head of the regulatory body and his deputy, they both resigned in protest, but no one actually cared to ask them why you have resigned, and now they are actually very vocal against the nuclear program, not because they are nuclear engineers. They are against the nuclear program not because they don't believe in the technology. They are against it because they know that Jordan politically is not ready to have a nuclear power program. The second example I would like to give you is I had off-the-record discussion with a senior member of the Emirati regulatory body. Clearly I cannot mention his name, but he mentioned that the regulatory body in Emirates have very little authority on deciding what to do or what not to do. What happens is that there's a consulting company called Lightbridge, which was mysteriously founded 1 year before the Emirati nuclear program, is currently providing all the advice and drafting all the regulations for the US, for the UAE. The problem is that Lightbridge also works with the promoter of nuclear energy, the contractors, and therefore there's a clear conflict of interest here. And actually, on the personal level, I'm hoping to write a whole chapter on the role of consulting companies in energy policy in the Middle East in my upcoming book about the subject. The last example I would like to mention is Turkey. As I said, Turkey, they want to build a nuclear reactor in Akkuyu on the Mediterranean coast. This site was chosen in the early 70s. Now, this site, I think we as Lebanese, we should be concerned as well, because given certain climate conditions, we might be affected in the case of an accident. So this reactor site is seismically active, and prominent Turkish scientists and prominent Turkish geologists, they wrote about this a lot, that this site is not suitable. However, the government is still considering this site for this nuclear reactor, discarding all the warnings that this site is not suitable, and it's very vulnerable from seismic point of view. So to summarize, nuclear power makes little economic sense for the Middle East, given the promising prospects of solar power and expected decline in prices of natural gas over the next decades. Countries in general make their energy policy choices based on multiple reasons. Economics is part of it, but not everything. I know this, or this is a fact. Other factors that are very relevant to the Middle East, such as national prestige and the resultant ability to develop nuclear weapons, could be also reasons why these countries have considered these options. Nuclear safety and public acceptance also remain major challenges, and we should follow what's happening in Egypt or in Jordan to see if actually public acceptance or public disapproval might cause some changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ahmad, especially for sticking to the time. There has been many questions during the lecture, but I think we still have a bit more time for a few more. Yes.
Just a quick question, or maybe something or comment. You didn't quite talk about the need for water in all these plants, and especially for our region, for the Middle East, let's say Saudi Arabia is planning on building a plant. We know they have huge desalination plant for their own need right now. I mean, is this ever factored into this economic analysis and quantified? If you do, you mentioned doing consulting for these countries. Do you ever mention this is a factor worth considering?
Desalination is indeed a major factor, particularly for the GCC. To answer your question, yes, we have included economic study about desalination in our paper. Perhaps I can send you the paper so you can have more details about it. In terms of desalination, nuclear power has the advantage that it can give you higher capacities. You have two problems. The first problem, the desalination may request or may require to change slightly your nuclear power plant design. And this has been done in previous cases, but not in a larger scale. So I think when it comes to larger scale, you need like more technical changes, and this might be challenging. But in terms of capacity, because nuclear power, this is the main advantage, releases a lot of energy to the surroundings, and this energy can be easily used for desalination. And from that point, it has an advantage. But compared to solar. But if you compare to natural gas, if the price, again, Saudi Arabia has plenty of natural gas reserves, and they can use the same principle, desalination principle, to produce water from the natural gas plants, and the cost will be much lower.
But this wouldn't take the environmental impact into consideration, right?
Do you mean like...
desalinating water and ending up with the end product of desalinating, ending up with really salty water, not bad.
I'm not an expert in different desalination technologies, but I know that there are different technologies. Some technologies might work better for nuclear, some technologies might work better for solar or gas. But in general, all these technologies have environmental impact, because one of the output of the desalination is you have this very salty water that you give back, and you might change the ecosystem of but I think this should be something common between all depends on this the salinity of your water. But I'm afraid I don't have a clear answer here. Yeah.
Can I ask something about the decommissioning cost?
Sure.
It has, I mean, as you mentioned, it has been almost completely neglected of the numbers. But I mean, I would like to get from you an answer. Double the cost in dollars per kilowatt hour, or it will be 10% higher? I know there are large uncertainties, because really completely disregarding it, it's like making a big lie, trying to promise cheap energy while really it is not cheap.
You're right.
One example is France. France has one of the most expensive energies in Europe, electric energy. Whereas, for example, Denmark has much lower energy, even though most of their capacity traditionally has been coal and coal-based generation.
Sure. I think you're absolutely right. If you can prove that nuclear power is more expensive without decommissioning, this is even a stronger argument, because even without including decommissioning, it's already more expensive. You have two problems with estimating the cost of decommissioning. The first one is that countries are not transparent. So countries, for different reasons, they don't give you clear estimates of how much money they are spending on decommissioning. And the second reason is that you don't know the real progress. For example, how much decommissioning has happened. Is it 90%? Is it 10%? And things are always open, so there's no transparency at all. I can give you an example. You asked for numbers. I can give you numbers, but not generic. I can give you specific numbers about the UK. The UK estimates that decommissioning of each nuclear reactor is $5 billion. So the decommissioning of the reactor is as expensive as building a reactor. So by this simple mathematics, you can just multiply the cost by 2. Yeah.
What after time comes for all these reactors to be decommissioned?
France is a very interesting case. I looked at there because I was intrigued by Europe. Also very relevant. It reminds me of something relevant to Saudi Arabia as well. So France decided to go nuclear after the Arab oil embargo in the 70s, and they have this emergence of energy security, and they wanted to be more independent. Of course, they have corporate interest as well, but that was the main rationale. And what happened with France, they built all this nuclear capacity because they overestimated their demand. So they thought that France will continue to have sharp increase in energy demand, but after 10 years, their demand became more asymptotic. So I'm using physics terminology now. So this is a very relevant problem to Saudi Arabia, because in our paper, I showed that if the demand, the difference in the demand rate per year is in the range of only 2%, Saudi Arabia, in 30 years, they will have access of 300 gigawatt. And this means they would spend a lot of money. They would invest a lot of money on energy resources that they may not need. So this is a very, for France now, nuclear power is kind of more, has much more than economic factors. As I said, there's a strong corporate interest. For example, the only EDF, the French company, is government-owned company, and therefore I think I'm not expert in the French political system, but the people who govern France, they come from certain backgrounds and they have certain connections with these corporates. So you have more underlying reasons for this. But what they will do regarding decommissioning? They are doing one thing, which is, in my opinion, is a big problem. They are extending the lifetime of their reactors. So a nuclear reactor is designed to operate for 40 years. They are extending its lifetime to 60 years. And when the 60 years comes, they extend it for another 20 years. And eventually something wrong will happen. And well, I hope not. But if you keep doing that, these old equipments might hurt you back.
So one of the main advantages of nuclear energy is that as long as the reactors run.
Yes.
So if you look at solutions as solar or wind, are there any good solutions today that you don't know of to store the power?
Sure. This is actually a very good point. Proponents always stress that nuclear power is a base load, while you have intermittency problems with solar or perhaps wind more. Here you have two things. The first thing you have is if you follow the science of thermal storage, recently they have major advances in this field. So if you can have thermal storage working, now it's, are still in this kind of premature phase. But if you have thermal storage working in the next 10 years, you are pretty much, you can have it dispatchable, or you can have baseload solar. But for me, forget about this solution, okay? This might be blue sky science. What can be done is a hybrid. My proposal, actually this is one of the ideas I'm working on for the GCC at the moment, is to have a hybrid gas renewable grid. Something when I worked on Saudi Arabia I found very intriguing is that if you plot their demand profile, okay, this is very similar to many countries. You have low demand at some point, and then the demand peaks and then comes back again. And this is over the year and also over the day, okay? For example, their peak demand during the day is midday, when there is all the air conditions are working on. And their peak demand over the year is in the summer and in Ramadan as well. What I noticed is that the difference between their peak demand and their base demand is very significant. This means that they don't have a baseload problem. Their baseload can be easily met by natural gas. Their problem is peak demand, but here you have a surprise, that their peak demand is exactly the profile of their peak demand is exactly identical to their profile of solar insolation. So solar technology can meet their peak demand completely. And the base demand that they have during the night or during seasonal variations, they can easily rely on natural gas to cover that.
This question, how come United Arab Emirates
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
United Arab Emirates,
Uh-huh.
how come do they have
Okay.
I mean,
When I write the book, when I write the chapter about the role of consulting or consultancy companies in the Middle East, I would be happy to send you a copy. Perhaps we'll have more answers by that time because this is something I'm still working on. But again, I think you have, in my honest assessment, I think you have two things. The first one is national prestige. Okay. The second thing is that the UAE was pushed by the West because the West wanted to create a counterexample of Iran. So the West wanted to create an example. Look at the UAE. This is a country that has very good relationship with the West, and therefore this country can have a nuclear power. So Iran, if you do like the UAE, if you surrender your right to enrich uranium or surrender your right to reprocessing, we can be as cooperative with you. I think this is the political side of it. And of course, the UAE, the prestige factor is a main factor. The other thing which I mentioned earlier that I really would like to get to the bottom of it is the corporate interest or the role of consulting in shaping not only energy policy in the Emirates, but energy policy in the Middle East in general. Because you often find that governments, they either don't trust their own scientists or their own committees, or they ignore them, or they give more leverage or more power to international consulting companies.
Insofar as you surrender all of your responsibilities, the prestige factor is not important.
Well, the prestige factor is that you have a nuclear power plant. Well, I mean, you're right.
Basically no control over.
You're right, and not only this. I mean, for example, when you talk about to the UAE people, or even in Jordan, they mentioned localization. We want to build the next generations of nuclear engineers. We want to have current local industries like steel industries and other industries. But if you look now, if you go to the website of the Emirati Nuclear Power Commission, you will find that 99% of the jobs are actually targeted at foreigners, not UAE people. And you're right. I mean, by surrendering their rights they are pretty much getting only the electricity. They have no control whatsoever. But again, it's a prestige of we are a nuclear country. We have joined a club of nuclear countries, regardless of what is in the back kitchen.
If anything, the Iranian model is probably the best way to move forward in terms of local.
Sorry, say again?
The Iranian model is probably the best way to move forward in terms of indigenous.
For me personally, I am not a big favor of nuclear power, whether it's in Iran or it's in the UAE. I think for the same reasons I said, a lot of reasons why nuclear power is not convenient for Saudi Arabia. These reasons actually fit more for Iran. Iran has more gas than Saudi Arabia. Iran has more oil than Saudi Arabia, well, relatively maybe. But Iran has the same solar insolation pattern. So for the same reasons why nuclear power is not convenient or appropriate for Saudi Arabia is also for Iran. But the only difference, I should mention this, the only difference why Iran can justify its nuclear program, it's that because they have invested so much money in it. And they have invested a lot of political cost. They have scientists that were assassinated. They have spent hundreds of billions. They were exposed to sanctions. They were isolated. So if you talk to Iranian scientists, and this is actually another area of research of mine, I do work on informing or advising nuclear negotiations with Iran. And if you talk to Iranian scientists, they say, we don't care what we have to pay next because we have already paid a lot. So this is their rationale, basically. And this is not, in Saudi Arabia, this does not exist. But from economics point of view, Iran has more incentive to ditch nuclear power more than other countries.
Okay, last question.
Is there any other country than the UAE that gave up control of its nuclear, like of producing the whole?
Right. This is actually in diplomatic terms, it's called the 123 agreement. If a country signs with the US the 123 agreements, these countries, they surrender their right to do enrichment and reprocessing. So I think in the Middle East, no other countries apart from the UAE has done that. So the UAE did that because they wanted to fast track their program. If the UAE did not sign this, it would have taken them 5 or 6 years more just to negotiate their situation, but they wanted something very quick. I know for sure Jordan is clear that it does not want to sign the 123 agreement with the US. I'm not sure that if they are pushed politically more, they might do it, but so far I'm getting the signs that they don't want to do that. So globally, you have Vietnam. Vietnam have signed this agreement with the US, but the interesting thing is that the Vietnamese got more from this deal than the UAE. So the UAE people now are looking at themselves, okay, despite that we are very close to the US, and given the history between Vietnam and the US, Vietnam managed to get even more. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Excellent. I appreciate it. Excellent.